Hi, hello, welcome to Orgone Continuum TV. What I'm doing today is, in this first series, Series 1, I'm just going through all my main papers and doing a video version. So the last, I haven't done a video for a while, and the last, I was going to start a new series, but I realised the first attempt at doing a video version of my first Oranur paper wasn't very good, so we're going to do that one again. So welcome to Series 1 of Orgone Continuum TV, where we're looking at my main papers. After the next series, it's going to be more informal. We're just going to chat about Orgone topics. And sort of whatever experimental work I'm doing at the time, and so on and so forth. So that to finish these, the last of the video versions, the full paper is called Preliminary Experiments with Electrical Capacitance, Temperature, Radioactivity, Luminescence, and Other Observations Associated with Controlled Oranur in a Strong Orgone Device. And that paper was published by the Journal of Psychiatric Orgone Therapy, which is at psychorgone.com, which is PSYCH, so psych as in mind, and then orgone.com. And I assume you can still see me while I'm flipping about between pages here. So back to the paper. So the synopsis of it: a strong orgone device was activated with a controlled dosage of a very small amount of radioactive material, absolutely tiny amount, really. I mean, I used the radioactive americium from a smoke alarm, and the amount of radioactivity in a smoke alarm is absolutely tiny. You can buy slightly radioactive crystals, which have got a lot more radioactivity than a smoke alarm. But it seemed to be enough to stimulate the Oranur reaction in a safe way. Possible anomalous occurrences are noted in terms of a small increase in electrical tension in batteries and capacitors placed within the Oranur device. Other possible reports are noted, such as a small change in radioactivity, temperature, magnetism, luminescence, and other observations. So my long-term goal is examination of orgone in consciousness, and so to do that, I assume that I'd need a very high orgone charge, because both consciousness and organisms are associated with a higher concentration of orgone or life force. So my first experimental step in the direction of examining how orgone or life force relates to consciousness, which Wright never clarified. It's the one area of his work which is incomplete. The theories he did have on how orgone creates consciousness didn't work. Basically, he put forward a kind of systems, a form of materialism, which became systems theories. But it's not in keeping with the rest of orgonomy. So basically, orgonomy was missing a working theory of how consciousness occurs. So in experimental terms, because consciousness is associated with organisms, and organisms have a high energy charge, I assumed that to examine orgone and consciousness experimentally outside of an organism, I first have to create a very high orgone charge. The first experimental step, therefore, was to investigate high orgone concentrations and the possibility of any self-generated electrical activity. Another thing, when you find consciousness in an organism, there's generally self-generated electrical activity. As radioactivity is thought to be the strongest activator of orgone, Oranur, or which is a contraction of Oranur, is orgone, OR, against a nuclear. So that an Oranur reaction was studied through the experimental setup. An approximately 6 foot by 3 foot human-sized ORAC cabinet, or orgone accumulating cabinet. So a traditional, the same way that the same way that Reich makes an orgone cabinet. Let's move this a little bit. A traditional Reichian orgone cabinet was used, a large one that's big enough to sit a human being in. Putting the cabinet at first, I'm talking about how I was placing the cabinet. I placed it upright first, and that reduced the charge, so I placed it back down horizontally. Inside the cabinet was placed a number of orgone accumulating devices. So altogether, approximately 12 orgone devices were inside the larger ORAC cabinet. So one hell of a concentrated orgone charge was there. But perhaps that was why it's possible to stimulate a controlled Oranur reaction with such a small amount of radioactivity. Incidentally, I'll put the disclaimer at the beginning. I've been studying orgone and have read virtually the entire literature and been at masters. Well, I've got the only Master of Science. There's one other Masters that James DeMeo has, and so unless you're very familiar with orgonomy and you're a confident researcher or qualified scientist, then you shouldn't really be working with Oranur until more is known about it. So let's get back to where we were. So we've got a very strong orgone setup. So a human-sized orgone cabinet laid, instead of being upright vertically where the person sits in it, it's been laid horizontally, and then 12 different orgone boxes inside the big orgone device to create a synergy and to raise the charge. You can hear my birds in the background there. Right, so all the orgone devices were made of standard materials: steel, rock wool, Celotex, wood frames. There was even an orgone suitcase in there, rock wool and steel layers. 2 orgone tubes based on the Bern-Senf design, BERND, Berned, Senf, SENF. Professor Senf, he's a professor in Germany, and he created orgone acupuncture tubes for pointing at acupuncture points. So there is 2 large Bern-Senf type orgone tubes in the large box as well. So 6 different types of experiments were carried out: electrical, thermal, orgone field, i.e. using an orgone meter, which it's a device that you can get miniature ones now, but Reich made the first ones, and it's an electrical meter, but it specifically picks up orgone charge, because I don't know a lot about electrical effects, but I assume that the the electrical circuit is influenced by a stronger orgone field, and that registers as a percentage on the meter. So it's not an absolute reading. It's just a relative reading. The radioactivity measurements were taken with a Geiger counter, magnetic measurements, and there was some luminescence experiments. So the first set of experiments involved orgone charging of chemical batteries. So that there was some effects of rechargeable batteries were left in the Oranur box for some time, and there was some effects from the on some of the batteries. I got an anomalous increase in the electrical capacity of the battery when it was Oranur charged, and I've since found out that some people in Africa have recharged batteries just using solar effects. But I suppose it's a similar effect to that. But it's not an easy thing to repeat. Sometimes I got an effect, and sometimes I didn't, and I had to do loads of work trying to separate what was the orgone charge and what was a sort of a rebound effect from the battery. So that was a real headache. Spent months doing that, and so there was some effects with some of the batteries. It was a hard thing to repeat reliably. So I got easier effects by taking a part charged battery, and because there's already something there to work on. There is an electrical orgone interaction effect. Robert Maglione, his papers in Psych Orgone, and that he's co-written. He's shown that those. I'll just look up who he co-wrote those papers with. He's shown that there is an effect from orgone condensing into electrical effects. If you look for electric currents in orgone devices, and that's by Roberto Maglione and Dionisio Ferrari, and you can find their free papers and some further papers on Oranur in the Psych Orgone journal, and they're really excellent papers. I would most recommend those. And so this kind of builds on that work, and also Reich's work, which all shows that when you compress orgone enough, it spontaneously changes into an electrical charge. So for part of my experiments, I thought it'd be easier if the chemical batteries already had a small amount of charge in them, because then the orgone's got something to work on. So I compared part charged chemical batteries that were orgone charged to part charged chemical batteries that were non-orgone charged. and I picked up an effect more easily then, only if in the terms of millivolts still, but it was easier to pick up an effect. Because it was so complicated, separating the Orgone effect from rebound effects, and because sometimes chemical batteries reacted better than others, I thought it'd be easier if I took an electronic capacitor and Orgone charged them to see an effect. And so if you read the paper, this will be under electronic capacitor experiments, which is about the second or third section. And an electronic capacitor is actually a mini Orgone accumulator. So it's ideal, a very weak one. So it's an ideal thing to study. They're little things that go in a circuit board. Generally, the ones I use were little round tubes with like two pieces of wire coming out the top. So I did a long series of sort of in-depth experiments over many weeks, charging boxes of electronic capacitors with various sets of controls. Quite a well, it wasn't blinded, but it was a pretty good controlled setup. And as you can see, if you look at the graphs on the paper, there was a definite difference between Orgone charge capacitors and the control capacitors over 4-5 sets of experiments, each one running over a number of weeks. Then there was temperature measurements, so that the Orgone Oranur, or the Oranur setup is so strong that it raises the temperature in the whole room. So I did a set of what's called TO to T experiments, which was Reich's term for temperature Orgone versus temperature control. And just with a normal electronic sort of household temperature gauge, and have that at the same level in each room. And I took temperature measurements in 3 or 4 different places in the room, in the Orgone room, and compared that to an identical room on the right next door, because you couldn't compare inside and outside the box, because as I was saying, the box heated up the entire room. So I had all the heating off, and no other sources of heat. And one set of temperature readings were taken on the same side of the building, so receiving the same amount of sunshine as the Orgone room. And there was a definite TO to T difference. I'll just read you that. The temperature within Orgone devices has been noted to be higher than the ambient surroundings in a number of controlled experiments since Reich's discovery of the effect. It's termed TO to T for temperature Orgone versus temperature controlled. Rigorously controlled TO to T experiments have been conducted by Tomeo and others. TO to T suggests that there is an anomalous energy accumulated in the ORAX. The temperature in the inner box of the Oranur device, the immediate surroundings of the device, and a control room were compared. An identically treated room immediately next to the Orgone device was used as control. Temperature is measured over 4 weeks with a good quality electronic thermometer, accurate to 1/10 of a degree centigrade, in October 2017. There was a small differential between the inner box of the device and the Orgone device room. Between the Orgone device room and the control room, there was an almost constant differential of between 0.1 and 0.8 degrees centigrade, averaging around 0.3 to 0.4 of a degree Celsius. A correlation between the placement of the radioactive material nearer to the device and a change in in the orgone temperature was not noted, though it may have occurred and been too subtle to notice. Weather was the usual mixture for the northwest of England of mostly cloudy conditions. Temperature was recorded at the same height in each room. Heat sources were kept off entirely, and so on. Then the next set of experiments were orgone field measurements using a helionosis experimental life energy meter. Was used to take over. Helionosis is the company that makes these Reich-based life energy meters. That's helio as in the sun, HELIO, gnosis, GNOSIS. So the meter uses electrical interaction to indicate the strength of orgone fields. Wright developed the first device, which has been modernized and miniaturized. A number of readings were taken on a daily basis. Reading was taken at the entrance to the orgone room. The second reading was taken 3 foot from the orgone device. The reading was also taken at the outside wall of the device. Another 2 readings were taken inside the device, at the outer wall of the device and inside the inner box. The field from an orgone charged piece of orgonite that was charged inside the Oranur box was measured, and the actual radioactive americium was measured, but in 2 places. It was measured at the entrance to the orgone room and 3 foot from the device. And all readings were done with the same settings on the device, on the life energy meter. So most of the readings were as expected. The outside of the room was about half of inside the room, indicating a fairly large field getting stronger near the device. The outside wall of the device, the inner and outer walls of it all gradually increased in charge from the outer to the inner readings. There was a gradual increase in the consistency of the meter readings of the inner boxes as the americium, as the radioactive source was moved closer to the device. As the radioactive source moved closer to the device, the life energy meter readings went higher to a level that was similar to the readings that you would expect, sort of an inch from a person's hand. And the americium itself was its own life force readings were measured, and when the americium was near to the orgone device, its life force measurement was suppressed, so that as compared to the life force reading of the americium when it was away from the device. So that's just an interesting aside. Small piece of orgonite and a similar sized crystal was orgone charged in the Oranur device and readings taken with the meter. And the orgonite had higher charge than the crystal, and they both gained and lost sort of a modest amount of charge in a cyclical manner over the weeks. So the next lot was the radioactivity experiments. So I'll just quickly run through those. A small amount of radioactive americium-241 was used. It was present inside a sealed smoke alarm, which remained there for the experiments. In terms of activity, it was 0.9 microcuries of americium. This corresponds to an amount of 0.26 micrograms of americium. It was first placed 12 foot away from the Orgone device. After a week, it was moved to 6 foot, then 3 foot a week later, then 1 foot, then within the device for a day, and lastly, just outside the device. After 5 weeks, the Americium was removed from the vicinity completely. Reich used 1 milligram of radium-226 in his original experiments. This corresponds to 1,111 times the radioactivity I used. The actual radioactivity readings on a Geiger counter were barely over the background count of 0.08 to 0.12 microsieverts per hour. And I used a new Radex 1 Geiger counter to measure the radioactivity readings. The radioactivity readings remained within normal limits and were around 0.08 to 0.22 microsieverts per hour. However, there was a slight raise over the background levels. Wright used counts per minute, but this measure varies depending on the Geiger tube. So microsieverts per hour are the standard today, but they're based on the same effect that Wright noted. In counts per minute, the background count would be approximately 20 counts per minute using the meter I used. The daily microsievert readings reflected the life energy meters in that there was a suppression effect near the Orgone device. But yeah, it's not simple. There's kind of circles of effects around the Oranur device, and there's a suppression effect right close by it sometimes, but an increased microsieverts a little bit further away. A typical reading was around 0.16 microsieverts 18 to 24 foot away from the Orgone device, compared to 0.12 microsieverts close up. So almost all the readings showed a modest suppression of the microsieverts per hour readings of about 25% close to the Orgone device, and a small raising of the readings over background within the extended field of the device of 6 to 24 foot. So when the radioactivity source was placed near the large Orgone box, there was an increase in the general radioactivity, but it was still within normal limits. When the radioactivity source was placed within the device, there was a spike in the readings to 0.22 microsieverts per hour, and a heavy atmosphere was noted, which needed to be cleared with door busting, which I used a small door buster of just steel tubes in a bucket of water. So there was a few anomalous radioactive observations. When the device was in its new location, 3 lots of 0.9 microcuries of americium was brought within its field to a position of 1 foot for 5 minutes. And this was done without the gradual conditioning period used previously, when the americium was brought 50% closer to the device each week. After this, the microsievert readings for about 40 foot around the building were suppressed to 0, but then they went back to normal 15 minutes later. And there was another anomaly where a psychotherapist who's also a shaman and a psychic medium she had a very stimulating effect on the Geiger readings when she's near the Oranur box. And in fact, anyone who's psychic has to be very careful of Oranur. It's well, I'll be going into this at another point, but suffice it to say for now that people who are psychic or mediums get affected very strongly by Oranur, and also are almost like radioactive sources upon Oranur. Right. So then I talk about the cautionary notes. The author would recommend that if one sort of various recommendations about repeating Oranur experiments, that the following list of precautions are taken, which I shall go through, but also to repeat the disclaimer that unless you're well studied in orgonomy and you're a trained researcher or scientist, you shouldn't consider repeating Oranur experiments. With the gradual placement of the americium closer to the Orgone device, no great untoward effects appeared to have occurred. The actual levels of radioactivity used were tiny and were all within normal background levels. So the background level of radiation did go up to sort of maybe what you'd find on a mountainside, but still within normal limits. But at times it did become somewhat overpowering and needed door busting. And the device remains Oranur charged virtually forever after it's been used, and it can have quite emotional effects on people. So the author would recommend to trained researchers and scientists that to repeat Oranur experiments, the following precautions are taken as a minimum. Separate building, at least 24, possibly 40 foot away from where you're going to be sort of inhabiting. I used 1,000th of what Reich used. You can acclimatize an Orgone device to the presence of radioactivity. So sudden movements into an Orgone field can be different than gradual ones. Monitor for changes of staying nearer to an Orgone device for an extended period, such as suntan effects and tingling on the skin. And the higher the Orgone charge, the more it will interact with radioactive material. Or if you've got more radioactivity, you need less Orgone charge. Parts of the Oranur device remain hot or different from before permanently. Oranur has different qualities to Orgone. It can affect psychics and spiritual healers very strongly, and it can affect everybody emotionally. It can also be dehydrating. It does seem to have therapeutic effects. Oranur is not the opposite of Orgone. People make this mistake quite often. They think that Orgone is good and Oranur is bad. That's not the case at all. What Oranur is Orgone. It's excited Orgone. That's what an organism has. All organisms are basically Oranur. So people confuse Oranur with DOR or deadly Orgone or negative Orgone, whatever you want to call it. But that is Orgone that's stopped moving and that's dying, whereas Oranur is Orgone that's very excited. And obviously in Reich's experiments, he pushed the threshold right to the maximum that could be done at that time. So Oranur in a more controlled level is very healing and not necessarily damaging at all. It's just excited Orgone. So I've used controlled amounts of Oranur for healing on myself. quite successfully, and with others to a limited degree. So at some point I'll talk more about the therapeutic effects, but just to note that there are therapeutic effects. Actually, in the second paper, I do talk second Oranur paper. I do talk more about therapeutic effects, so I'll cover that in the next video. Those magnetic effects, Oranur throws a strong Oranur device will throw a magnet up to 180 degrees. And lastly, there was very strong luminescence effects. I took a plasma ball, which is based on Nikola Tesla's device, which it's been kind of corrupted into just an entertainment thing, which you can get those plasma balls that you have for discos, and you connect it up to the electricity, and the plasma gets excited by the central electrical electrode, and then when you put your fingers on it, it gets little lightning sparks, and there's a little blue glow. But I took a plasma ball of that type, and Oranur charged it for a number of weeks, and once you get a strong Oranur charge in the plasma becomes very reactive. So just without attaching it to an electrical current at all, I just put some cling film on the Oranur charged plasma ball, took the cling film off, and that little bit of electrical stimulation is enough to make the plasma glow bright blue, which it doesn't do when you connect it to a DC voltage. You get a slight blue mist and the sparks, but you don't get this incredible blue organotic glow. You'll have to have a look at the paper to see it. But if you go to the paper and have a look right at the end, you'll see figure 11, luminescence in an Orgone charged plasma ball. So in conclusion, alongside the Italian Orgone and electric currents research, and of course Reich's original vacuum and Geiger tube work in the Oranur experiment first report, the author is confident that an Orgone to electrical conversion takes place within Orgone accumulators. It would appear that a strong Oranur-influenced Orgone device is perhaps capable of precipitating the accumulation of electrical charge in devices such as capacitors, electronic capacitors, and even in chemical batteries, though there is much more work to be done in this regard. It would also appear to be possible to conduct controlled small-scale Oranur experiments as long as certain precautions are undertaken and one is careful not to proceed too quickly or with anything other than very small amounts of excitatory material until more is known. The author would recommend not exceeding approximately 1,000th of the quantity Reich used. Experiments should also be under the supervision of experienced Orgone researchers or qualified scientists. The author does not recommend Oranur experiments being conducted by non-qualified or inexperienced persons. Results of previous Oranur research since Reich. A team led by the Spanish physicist Millian previously confirmed a radioactive and electrical capacitance anomaly in modified Faraday cages, a term for Orgone boxes that was more acceptable within physics journals. Their initial experimentation was carried out in the 1980s and presented to the European Society for Scientific Exploration in 1998. A brief synopsis was published in 2002 in Pulse of the Planet journal, DeMio's journal, that was last published 2002. Since then, the Spanish physicists have also confirmed their anomalies to have a correlation to cosmic weather conditions. Maglione has also examined various Oranur effects, including those of Millian, in his extensive and in-depth book covering Reich's Oranur work in a broad scientific context, including looking at the Ark of the Covenant, which was 1,000. It's funny, but the Ark of the Covenant is 1,000 times stronger than Reich's experiment, and Reich's experiment is 1,000 times stronger than my experiment. So you wouldn't want the Ark of the Covenant in your back shed, I can tell you that. This is only the second experimental investigation of Oranur effects since Reich to be published. And it's also the first full article on Oranur in the Orgonomic journals since Reich published Contact with Space in 1957. So the first experimental investigation was that sort of initial foray into whether a metal box has any effect on radioactive processes by the Spanish physicists. So, and then there's extensive details of electrical currents in Orgone devices. The extensive experimentation detailed by Maglione and Ferrari in Italy, which you can also see in the same journal, psychorgone.com, or Journal of Psychiatric Orgone Therapy. And that should about cover that article. So I've whizzed through that a bit, but anyway, I'm looking forward to starting series 2, because I'd like to talk more generally and just chat about orgonomy and my research, rather than being so sort of tied into the papers. But I wanted to get a video version of all the papers I've written. So I think there's just one more to go, or there might be 2. Well, there's one more major paper to do, but I might do another one in this series of going through any bits and pieces and articles I've written. But I'm looking forward to getting on to the next series, which I'll start after that. And that's it. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. And I don't know how to stop this thing. There we go, end stream. Okay, bye for now.